And remember, Fontana is all about the draft with the Hanford device. It's like coming up behind a semi at 90 miles an hour and just being pulled right into the back of it.
Oh! Oh, an enormous crash. Oh my God. A terrible crash. Yellow comes out again.
This was the moment. This was the moment that ended the brightest star in the sport. This was the moment that paused the tremendous forward progress of one of the greatest to ever drive an IndyCar. This was the moment we lost Greg Moore. A name that today is synonymous with tragedy and a what if. What if he even surpassed Paul Tracy or Jacques? What if this was a simple bad incident, one that would have only written off that season, but would have seen him as the next year's champion? In order to understand what could have been, we must first learn what was. This is the story of Greg Moore, the legend in the red gloves. Greg was born on April 22, 1975, in New Westminster, British Columbia, raised in Maple Ridge. Already at the age of 6, he was turning solo laps in a go-kart, and also playing as a hockey goalie in the interim. For his ability to juggle both sports so efficiently at a young age, he became an Athlete of the Year twice over, between the ages of 6 to 10. His father, Rick, had an old Can-Am car. Greg could be seen hopping in it, pretending to run through the gears. Coquitlam's Westwood Motorsports Park would be the origins of the number 99 plate and his pattern of success, starting with him winning 2 of the 3 heats in his first ever race. He'd only just received his karting club membership. His old man would ensure that he stayed on the straight and narrow. If he was going to make it a serious career choice, he must work for it. This, of course, meant having good grades in school and working at his trade in order to help refine his already impressive raw talents, but also to come to better grips with his mechanical tolerances. By the time he was 16, he would sharpen his discipline as well, under the guidance of Richard Spenard, the incredibly versatile 1986 Canadian Formula Atlantic champion. He would graduate the top of his class out of 40 other students. It was after this that he had made his choice. He'd drop hockey and opt for open-wheel racing. Wayne Gretzky might have been a childhood idol of his, but so was Ayrton Senna. Rick would call in a favor from another racing friend of his, Steve Chalice. Steve was immediately impressed with Greg's feedback and natural understanding. The Van Diemen chassis effectively became an extension of his own 2 hands and feet. He'd win Rookie of the Year honors in 1991. Calling upon his Spenard education, the next year would see him jump to USAC's USF 2000, where he'd win the Rookie of the Year honors and sit atop the series as champion. He was only 17 years old. It was time now for Greg to make another jump, eyeing the SCCA's Formula Atlantic Series for 1993. However, since he was underage, they would deny his hard card, despite his plethora of wins and racing school academia. Whilst in the meantime, Greg would go to work at a car dealership in the service department, his father would then ask the CEO of the Indy Lights series, Roger Bailey, if they could help make an exception. He agreed, and provided 2 provisional starts, both at Phoenix and Long Beach respectively. Despite this, since he was only 17, he was not allowed to start in the pits under his own power. He'd have to be towed to his starting position. And he was also forbidden from getting out of the cockpit, and would likewise have to be towed off the track post-race. Despite his road course education, he wasn't able to keep his pace on road and street courses, but he proved he could stick to them on ovals with ease. 1994 would see the need to do some trimming, both physically and financially. Greg committed to a weight loss regimen, and budget constraints in turn meant that the tire budget was effectively nullified. Tires must go the distance, even if others were allowed to pit and swap them. This also applied to mechanical components. Unneeded stress on the engine and suspension must be avoided if possible, as spares basically didn't exist. Despite sponsorship woes and running the whole operation effectively out of pocket, he surpassed Paul Tracy's record for youngest driver to ever win a kart-sanctioned event, and took home wins at New Hampshire and Nazareth. He'd go on to finish a 3rd in points. An unbelievable feat. Even with those wins and accomplishments to his name, he and his family knew it wouldn't be sustainable under the current method of operation. He would need additional help. Sure enough, his big break would come with players' foresight, seating him in the number 99 Buick V6 powered Lola, as they were eyeing a Canadian talent to fill their roster at the time. Greg didn't concern himself with the garage area politics, or indeed worry at all about equipment or tire sets. Everything that he needed to finish his season was more than readily available for him. And finish his season he did, winning 5 races in a row, and winning 10 out of the 12 races that year. He'd hoist the cup at the end of 1995, and once again broke Paul Tracy's records of both most wins in a season and consecutive victories. He had led no less than 375 laps out of the 583 total, and had a margin over the second place finisher by 142 points. 1996 would see his debut in kart, swapping the Lola for a Mercedes-powered Reynard, sticking with players Forsyth and taking over the seat from Jacques Villeneuve, and, as was tradition by this point, retaining the number 99 plate. He was now amongst the elite, the best of the very best. His debut race came at Homestead, starting 6th. Due to a marshalling error, he'd be forced to take a stop-and-go penalty and lose a lap. In spite of this, he unlapped himself and still managed to finish a very respectable 7th. For onlookers at the event, it didn't seem like they were watching a rookie, but instead a field veteran. In Ron Bouchard-esque fashion, he would more often pass folks on the outside line than the inside line. His car control was exceptional, and he'd round out that year with 3 podium place finishes and a best place finish at Nazareth in 2nd place. During the off-season, Greg admitted to feeling a bit like he was making up for lost time midway through the season, as though that the only way to overcome mechanical failure or bad circumstance was to simply overdrive the car. His crew chief, Neil Mickelwright, sat with him to explain that it was just his first season of competition. Many pitfalls are bound to happen. Very few even break into Champcar, and a driver's debut season of top-level competition is never meant to be a championship-winning one. With newfound perspective going into 1997, he took a much more patient approach. This nabbed him 3 top 5 finishes to start the season, and that year, at the Miller Genuine Draft 200 at the Milwaukee Mile, he made history once again. At the age of 22, he became the youngest driver in the kart series to ever win a race, and it would also be his first career win. The woes of the past were also history, and now he can finally focus on charging forward as a true championship competitor. He also would follow that up with another win at Detroit after both Pac West race cars ran out of fuel in the final stint. He'd finished that year 7th in points. His performances were closely observed by Frank Williams, who was keen on signing him as a test driver. As he was under contract with Forsyth, this wouldn't be possible for the moment. Frank would ensure that the option was made available to Greg once the contract was up. The CBC had approached Greg for an opportunity to fill in for Jackie Stewart in the commentary booth for the 1997 Canadian Grand Prix. However, the FIA stonewalled this as he was a kart driver. Instead of the commentary booth, Greg found a seat in yet another Mercedes vehicle, this time the legendary CLK GTR. He'd race in the final 2 rounds of that year's GT1 championship at Sebring and Laguna Seca in the number 12 car. He'd finished 7th in both those events. 1998 would see him in a refreshed Reynard with an even lighter version of the Mercedes power plant. At the season-opening race at Homestead, he'd write his name into the history books yet again by being the youngest pole sitter in the sport's history.
Andre Ribeiro for Roger Penske in the number 1 spot alongside former series champ Jimmy Vasser, then Christian Fittipaldi and Alex Zanardi. Now on the racetrack in an identically painted Reynard with Mercedes power and Firestone tires are Pontier's teammate Greg Moore. Moore coming around his first lap, good enough for a new speed record, 215.934 miles an hour. He almost leapt all the way over the 215 zone into 216.
And he's not finished yet. Don't forget, he's still got this one to go.
Across the line he comes and he improves and skips 216, goes to 217.5. Wow, Greg Moore, second fastest man in combined practice, leaps up to 217 miles an hour to take pole with 1 man yet to come. Let's get down to Gary Gerald.
Here's his teammate, Patrick Carpentier. I think everybody's almost speechless because of what your teammate has just uncorked. 217.5 miles per hour. Is that a shock?
Yeah, it is. It's very fast. I think that the team has good cars. Mine just went to a huge push, and I had to lift in the corners, but it was a great lap for Greg.
All right, and here is Greg coming in right now, and boy, they're all over this car down there. That's a dazzling run.
217. I mean, he didn't just, you know, kind of ease by him. He jumped over him and went right through the 216. Unbelievable.
What an astonishing performance by Greg Moore, Neil Mickelwright, and the team. They go to 2 cars, and instead of dropping down in performance, they have 2 of the quickest cars here at Homestead for the opening race of the season. Gary Gerald is with Greg Moore.
Greg Moore, you've just got everybody gasping in amazement here. Did you shock yourself?
A little bit. I mean, I had said yesterday that I thought a high 28.4 would do it, but to do a 24.85, I mean, that's pretty quick. But we still got one more car out there. But, you know, the best thing is it's going to be our best ever starting position ever in this series, and I think the players' team is going to be a factor all season.
This may sound stupid, but I'm going to ask you anyhow. Do you think there was any more there?
Maybe a tiny, tiny little bit. I mean, I had turns 3 and 4 flat, but 1 and 2 I still had to lift a tiny little bit. So maybe next year we'll get the get the whole track flat.
We look forward to tomorrow.
Thanks.
All right.
Hey, Bob, did you notice his voice when he had to start speaking? He was pumped up. That was a spectacular lap.
Despite this, he'd go on to finish second after an air jack failure on pit road caused him to lose track position. His 3rd career win came at Rio, putting him ahead of 1996 Rookie of the Year Alex Zanardi in points. He'd nab an additional 2 career poles at Gateway and Detroit. It would be at Michigan that year where his talents really came into their own. His 2nd win of the season, and his 4th career win to date, saw him fight it out against Jimmy Vasser and Zanardi. While it wasn't the Borg-Warner Trophy, hoisting the Vanderbilt Cup was equally as impressive, a hard-fought and well-earned achievement at that. The rest of the year, however, saw him struggle once again, stringing a series of DNFs. The only upshot to bookend the season was a pole position at Houston, and a 2nd place finish at the season-ending race at Fontana. He'd go on to finish that year a 5th in points. 1999 was largely expected to be his breakout year. Despite the late season DNFs from the previous season, problems with the equipment and additional attitude adjustments were figured out during the off-season. Despite his celebrity, he still lived in Maple Ridge, even though family and even close friends of him encouraged him to move to other places, and even with the additional cost of flying back to Vancouver, to him, it was more than worth it to stay where he was. The main goal for that season was to achieve the Drivers' Championship title, and if possible, the championship outright. It was also announced that he'd be leaving Forsyth at the end of the year and making the jump to Penske, where he'd replace Al Unser Jr. He'd also explored other options, including NASCAR, forging a relationship with drivers like Bobby Labonte, though he wouldn't have dived into it until at least the mid-2000s had he pursued it. His future was bright, and he had already achieved more than even he expected, surpassing his national compatriots, and proved that it was possible to be from the West Coast and make it as a motorsport star. He'd start the year off strong with another career pole position, and would go flag to flag to win at Homestead. Though he wouldn't be able to find victory lane after this, he nonetheless remained consistent, finishing in the top 10 for the next few races. This, however, would cost him the lead in the championship fight, and likewise the fight for the Drivers' Championship as well. He'd muster a runner-up place finish at Milwaukee, just behind Paul Tracy, with a 3rd place finish behind Paul at Detroit, where Dario Franchitti would be crowned the winner. Mechanical faults and crashes would derail his championship hopes, instead making the real title bout between Dario and Juan Pablo Montoya that year. As if his luck wasn't already bad enough, life decided to kick him while he was already down.
Well, it's more Toyota power getting ready to qualify on the racetrack in the person of Robbie Gordon. While he warms up, remember that Greg Moore was supposed to be 4th in this lineup. He didn't take the flag. We heard from Neil Mickelwright of his problems, but Jan, you've tracked him down.
Yes, in fact, Greg Moore has just stepped out of his coach, and you can tell by looking at his hand that it is severely injured. Greg, first of all, what happened?
I was on the way to morning practice this morning, and just come out of my coach on the way up, and I was on my motor scooter, and I was going along probably 10 or 12 miles an hour or something like that, and someone was coming at me in a pickup truck, and I guess she decided to turn into a parking spot where I was occupying at the time, and she hit the bike, and I went down, and unfortunately when I didn't want to hit my head, so I put my hand out on the ground, and I've broken a bone inside my hand, one of them, the 4th metatarsal. So frustrating, but you know, the kart medical doctors and my guys are working hand in hand on making a brace for me for tomorrow. So we'll get out this afternoon, do a couple laps probably, and then we'll see how we do tomorrow, you know, if I can grip the steering wheel or not.
So do you think that you'll get a good indication? I mean, a 500-mile race is brutal for a guy who's in good shape. And I can say from personal experience, I've broken that same bone. That seems very optimistic in my view.
Well, it's optimistic, but you know, I guess with being young, sometimes you do some things that probably aren't the smartest things out there. But I've got to go to Indianapolis on Tuesday and get a plate put on it anyway, so I can't do any more damage to it if I last the whole 500 miles. So it's just a question of if I can withstand the pain, and I know I'm going to get a couple shots for it in the morning tomorrow. And but the most important thing is that it's safe out there, and if I'm able to grip the steering wheel with no problems, then if there's a bit of pain, well, I'll just try and endure through it.
All right, we hope to see you out there. Thanks.
He would take a provisional starting spot, starting 27th. Despite his injury, he'd make the charge up to 15th. However, this would be cut short, as Richie Hearn hitting the inside wall would bring out the first caution of the day. Richie would fortunately walk away shaken, but not hurt. On lap 10, however, tragedy struck.
And remember, Fontana is all about the draft with the Hanford device. It's like coming up behind a semi at 90 miles an hour and just being pulled right into the back of it.
Oh! Oh, an enormous crash. Oh, my God. A terrible crash. Yellow comes out again. We're going to hold on identifying this car because there are two cars like it in the field. We want to assure ourselves they now report it is Greg Moore. We all hope that we will get good news from the scene of that accident on the backstretch here at the California Speedway. But the second yellow of the day is out. Michael is in front of the field. For an update now from the medical center, here's Gary Gerald.
Dr. Steve Olvey, who heads up the safety team, is here. What can you tell us, Doctor, about Greg?
Greg has severe head and internal injuries. He's being sent to Loma Linda Hospital for further resuscitative efforts. Dr. Jeff Grange, who's the chief emergency doctor here in this area, is with him in the helicopter and is going to report back to me soon.
This is a life-threatening situation?
Yes, it is.
Thank you.
This was an eerily similar incident, with a much worse result, wrecking out at virtually the same spot. Greg would be airlifted to hospital, suffering massive head and internal injuries. At Loma Linda Medical Center, after resuscitation efforts failed, Greg Moore would be pronounced dead at 1:21 p.m. on October 31st, 1999. He was only 24 years old. While today we look at it as a tragedy, and while it was very awful that he died so young, I don't think Greg would have wanted us to remember it this way. He was a centerfold of both his local community and the racing community. He may have been a competitive person on track, but he was the most approachable folk off the track. He never had any rivalries, instead forging new friendships between those who already had some. He formed the Brat Pack, and after his parties he made sure that everybody who attended went home safe and sound. He was caring, regardless of who you were or where you came from. The only thing bigger than the size of his accomplishments was the size of his heart.
I was 10 years old. I'd watch Ayrton Senna, Rick Mears, Alan Jr., Michael, Miriam. And you'd watch these guys, and that's what I wanted to do. I mean, I wanted to do that one day. Honestly, deep down inside, I wanted to, but I didn't think there was ever a chance I would. A kid growing up in Coquitlam and Maple Ridge, there's no way that you can, 99.999% of the people won't be able to do it. But with the faith that my dad had in me and other people along the way,